So welcome. Glad to see folks here. I am Amy Antonucci. I'm a New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund board member, and I'm really glad to welcome you to our Peace and Justice Conversation Series online on Monday, November 3rd, 2025. We're thrilled to tonight be welcoming Ambassador Chaz Freeman to talk about U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. First, let me say a few other welcomes here or bits of info. If you don't know us yet, for over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict. In the spirit of respect, we'd like to acknowledge that we do that work on the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook people, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and those people who have been in relationship throughout the generations. Real quick reminder about how we do Zoom. We invite you to have your video on. We're happy to see you, but we will have your audio muted to start with. The chat will be open for questions, and later on we'll get to do hand raising. Yeah, okay. So I am now actually going to pass it on here to Jesse Gillis, who is a New Hampshire resident, member of New Hampshire Veterans for Peace, and new member of the Board of Directors of New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund. He's been doing great work. We're so thrilled to be connected with him. And he is the one who made the connection with Chaz. So he is going to, again, introduce him and kind of lead the evening. So welcome, Jesse.
Thank you, Amy. Can you hear me? Okay. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing you to Ambassador Chaz Freeman. He has served in U.S. Foreign Service for over 30 years. His experience as a diplomat spans the globe, from Africa to the Far East. He's negotiated on our behalf with over 100 foreign nations. He was the principal interpreter for Nixon during the infamous visit to China in 1972. He was the ambassador to Saudi Arabia when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990 and played a leadership role in coordinating the coalition's forces in Operation Desert Storm. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs from 1993 to 1994. These are but a few remarkable roles of his distinguished career. He's held positions in academia, most recently as a visiting scholar at the Brown University's Watson Institute. He served as the co-chair of U.S.-China Policy Foundation, president of the Middle East Policy Council, and vice chair of the Atlantic Council of the United States. He brings tremendous insight to understanding U.S. foreign policy, its implications on the world stage, and how it reverberates here at home, economically, politically, and socially. Ambassador Freeman, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for informing everyone that I'm a refugee from Washington, D.C., who could not hold a job. I've ended up in Exeter, New Hampshire, at Riverwoods, which is a very splendid little retirement community. And it's a great honor and pleasure to be with you tonight. And I think the group is small enough, so I hope we can have a good discussion. I don't have any prepared remarks, but let me make a few comments about the world that we're dealing with. There are a whole lot of transitions going on. The 500-year period during which the West dominated and led the world is over. It may be that the 250-year or 249-year period since our independence, in which we had a constitutional democracy that inspired people abroad, is also over. It's clear that the period from, let's say, 1783 to, let's say, 1941 Pearl Harbor attack, during which we pretty much minded our own business and hid behind our two oceans and tried to stay out of other people's way. That is long over. The 80-year period from 1945 to 2025 this year, during which we led first the great coalition against the Soviet Union and its expansionist messianic push for world dominance, and then later unilaterally exercised global primacy. This is also over. And it's ending in a way that is very discomforting for me, and I suspect for many of you. It's ending in a disorderly withdrawal from world affairs. The compassion that Americans evidenced with institutions like the U.S. Agency for International Development, and which, by the way, now that it no longer exists, how are we going to help Jamaica recover from Hurricane Melissa? We've lost something important in terms of our image and our capabilities. And indeed, we are in the process of dismantling many of the leadership capabilities that we had for the last 80 years. People are being dismissed from their jobs. In the diplomatic field, there are very few people left who are both outspoken and expert in the areas that they had been managing. Fewer and fewer, and of course the government is shut down at the moment. There are people, as I did on a number of occasions, working without pay because they didn't join the federal government to get paid. You don't get paid very well in the federal government, but they joined it to serve the country, and they're still doing it. Anyway, we basically have not just a fiscal deficit with over $30 trillion in debt mounting every day, but we also have a strategy deficit. Nobody can tell us, or does tell us, what our purposes are in the new era. And so we're experiencing many contradictions and sometimes the blatant imposition of double standards. When a Ukrainian is killed by a Russian missile attack or drone attack, this makes the front pages of the newspapers. When tens of thousands of Palestinians die, it's barely noticed. And one could say also that we started out blaming China for genocide in Xinjiang because it was trying to forcibly assimilate the Uyghur population, the Kazakhs and Mongols and Kyrgyz and other minorities. I think there are 52 minorities in Xinjiang, and integrate them into the national culture. And part of this involved locking them up for education purposes. We call that genocide, but we've been in denial about the existence of genocide in Palestine. And now we seem to care nothing at all about the genocide in Sudan. And in fact, our president is now focused, to the extent he's focused at all on Africa, on a mythical persecution of Christians in Nigeria, which is about a third or more Christian. And most of the victims of the violence in Nigeria are victims of Boko Haram. They are Muslims being attacked by the Muslim equivalent of the rabid Zionists who now run Israel. Because I think if you look at the Middle East, or as I prefer to call it, West Asia, which really talks about it in its own terms, Admiral Mahan, the famous student of naval strategy, Alfred Thayer Mahan, is the one who came up with the term Middle East. Because, of course, the British and others called it the Near East, because it was nearer to them than the Far East. And he thought, well, it's not our Near East, that's Europe. So, well, let's call it the Middle East, and that Sharq al-Awsat in Arabic, and that somehow took. But it's been a scene for now really almost 80 years, 70 some years of ruthless expansion by Jewish settlers into the space that was inhabited by Palestinians. Ironically, genetically, apparently, Palestinians are the descendants of the original, mostly Jewish inhabitants of Palestine. They converted first to Christianity and then to Islam. Many of them are still, well, many of them were Christian. Christian population, Palestine has been largely driven out by Israel. But anyway, we have seen this come to American attention recently in ways that have changed opinions because of social media, which I don't use. But if you think for a moment about why it is that there was such a furor about TikTok, it's because 70% of young people in this country get most of their news from TikTok. And TikTok showed directly what was happening under Israeli occupation and the post-October 7 attacks in Gaza. Let me make a point that's probably obvious to all of you, and that is October 7th wasn't the beginning of the problem. The Israelis carried out what they called mowing the lawn periodically in Gaza to basically cut down any potential leader and reduce opposition to their oppression there. They kept doing the same thing in the West Bank. I mean, after they drove out about 750,000 Palestinians in their War of Independence, in which they took a good deal of the land that the UN had allocated for a Palestinian state, in addition to the land that had been allocated to a Jewish state. They have constantly sought to practice ethnic cleansing. As you probably know, or maybe you don't, actually Zionism is a Christian idea. It is not a Jewish idea. It was Christians who came up with the notion that they could do two good things: get rid of the Jews in Europe by exporting them to the alleged homeland, and second, satisfying the Jewish refrain of next year in Jerusalem. But I have to say, the values of Judaism, which is a humane religion, which emphasizes ethical reasoning and scholarship and acts of compassion, as well as the unity of the believers, and which is the foundation of both Christianity and Islam. There's a better story, by the way, of the virgin birth in the Quran than there is anywhere in our Christian literature. It is extraordinary that Judaism basically went to Palestine to die, and it has been reborn as a very cruel form of ethnic nationalism, which we've seen in action over the last few years. There is a so-called ceasefire in place now, or is there? It seems that Israel is killing Palestinians at more or less the same rate it did before the ceasefire. And I've asked friends to inform me of any case where Israel ever observed a ceasefire. And they can't point me to one. So this is, I suppose, not a surprise, but the problem is aggravated by the diplomatic ineptitude of the current administration, which has a habit of, and not just in Israel, let's say in Ukraine, ignoring what the warring parties are fighting about. and coming up with some tactical issue like a ceasefire, but not paying any attention to NATO enlargement, to the rights of Russian speakers and other minorities in Ukraine, or to the need for some reformation of European security architecture. And then when they strike out on the ceasefire, throwing up our hands and saying, well, we don't know what to do, and so forth. Pretty much the same thing has happened between Israel and the Palestinians. We've had amateur diplomats, Steve Witkoff, a crony of the president, the real estate mogul from New York, a committed Zionist, and Jared Kushner, who is, the president's son-in-law and the son of a convicted felon who's now our ambassador to France. Both very sympathetic to the Israelis and with no empathy at all to the Palestinians, coming up with a variety of schemes, the most bizarre and outrageous of which is the idea of the redevelopment of Gaza as a sort of Las Vegas on the Mediterranean, with no Palestinians having to be there. We've had the same issue with Iran. We've had, and that is to say, no clear strategy, no clear, and when we have a negotiation, it's been used by us or the Israelis or both of us as cover for a surprise attack on the negotiators. We just had this happen in Qatar with a group of Hamas leaders who were gathered to discuss peace terms with Israel and who were subject to an attack which violated the sovereignty of Qatar. Not that Israel cares about anybody's sovereignty but its own. So we have a pattern of creating a strategic issue and then finding a narrow tactical basis for dealing with it, retreating because it's hurting us. This has just happened with China. And then proclaiming that we've had some enormous victory, which is invisible to anyone who knows what the issues are. Not very hopeful. Israel is now at war, it says, with 7 or 8 different enemies, Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians on the West Bank, Lebanese. It has a ceasefire with Lebanon that it's violated over 4,000 times, and it is occupying territory in southern Lebanon that it had promised to withdraw from. Syria, where it's expanding its control of territory and trying very hard to vivisect Syria by connecting the Kurds and the Druze and disconnecting them from Damascus. Yemen, which has the distinction of being the only country that has actually lived up to its obligations under the Anti-Genocide Convention, taking action to combat the genocide. Iran, which Israel has attacked on 3 occasions, and which it has proclaimed it will again attack when it is ready. We can talk about that if you want. I don't think that will be a pleasant experience for Israelis. And then finally, the home front in the United States, where the internal enemies of Zionism are proliferating. And you can see this in the polls. You can see it even in the cautious reorientation of some politicians, not all, who say they will no longer take money from AIPAC. But I think your own experience, as I understand it, demonstrates that politicians in New Hampshire, no different from anywhere else, they dance to the tune of the donors. And so if you want to get a meeting with them, you got to get a powerful donor to demand it or arrange it. I think that has been your experience, as I understand it. So this is a bit of a rambling introduction, but I've raised a whole series of issues and would be happy to talk about them in detail. Either questions or comments, but I hope sufficiently brief to be, I'm an old man, I don't have a good memory, and I need to remember what you asked. So if you ask too many questions at once, I'll probably flub it. So let me stop here, and Jesse, you can take it over.
Well, I do. I'm going to set up the next question. I go back through the archives of lectures you've given, and in 2013, the Middle East Policy Council, you would characterize the U.S. foreign strategy as over the past 50 years, two strategies in the Middle East. One is to our self-interest of strategic and economic advantage, and the other was the support for the consolidation of the Jewish settler state, and how those are contradictory, they do not work together. And since you've given that talk, how it's been falling apart for us, not only can we not support them, but for what they do with impunity, and they lose favor. But this is destroying our credibility in the world stage, because we are stopping the international community from holding Israel accountable for its actions.
One of the main casualties of this contradiction has been international law. Our politicians no longer refer to the UN Charter or international law. We ignore it, ignore both, but we exercise our veto with great abandon whenever anyone criticizes Israel. Why do we do this? It has absolutely nothing to do with strategic or foreign policy calculations, and absolutely everything to do with the immense power of the Zionist lobby in the United States. And the interesting thing is that that Zionist lobby, which of course claims to have the support of Christian evangelists with various theories about how to bring on the rapture, which, by the way, doesn't include the Jews, apparently. This group has lost the allegiance of younger Jews who really don't want to be associated with what they're watching on TikTok and hearing discussed on campuses when the cops are not there to beat up anybody protesting. So I think the contradiction is great, but I would go back in history. It's not just that we have destroyed international law and our standing internationally, our moral standing internationally, by the double standards that we apply and by the commitment we've made. By the way, we enabled ethnic cleansing and genocide in Palestine, but now we're participating in it. That is really a big step. I mean, we enabled it with money and weapons and everything else, but now we're actually on the ground. I mean, we had this atrocity called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was basically, I understand you're dealing with mice, Jesse, but this was basically a mousetrap intended to catch human beings, not to feed them. And many who tried to get food from that foundation lost their lives trying to do it. Anyway, we're now in a situation, by the way, where, to my understanding, there have been only 4 trucks carrying medical supplies allowed into Gaza. Only 4 trucks. And the food that has been allowed in is only half or less of what was promised in the so-called peace plan. It's not a peace plan. It is a ceasefire aimed at releasing hostages. Those hostages, the only ones we cared about are the Israelis. But Israel holds a vast number of Palestinian hostages, and it has released some of them, but not those who might help produce a legitimate peace. not the leaders of the Palestinians who might be able to do that. So it's very clear that Israel has not given up its ambition to make a reality out of the original Zionist slogan, a people without land for a land without people. They're trying to create a land without people other than themselves, and we're in there with them.
I'm not up to date with the prime ministers or presidents who've spoken out and trying to say that they'll acknowledge a Palestinian state. They'll do everything, but it seems empty. These are empty gestures. They'll do everything but an arms embargo or forcing aid or forcing Israel to do anything, but they will acknowledge symbolically.
There are some governments that are honest and straightforward. The government of Spain, the government of Ireland come to my mind particularly. They have taken steps to impose an arms embargo. That's also the case of Chile, for example, just the other day. But you're right. For most of those who recognized the Palestinian state did so to demonstrate their displeasure with Israel, not to provide self-determination to the Palestinians. And it's very notable that in all the discussion of Gaza, almost no one raises the question of why Palestinians shouldn't be allowed to govern themselves. Why do they have to have Tony Blair and some kind of reincarnation of British colonialism imposed on them by the United States? So the basic issue here is self-determination. Self-determination for the victims of the Holocaust in Europe, self-determination for the Palestinians whom they have in turn victimized. And I don't see any reason why one group should be less entitled to self-governance and self-fulfillment than the other.
I think is it time to open up the floor to see who has
Well, there are a bunch of questions, so that's up to you.
Yes.
You want me to call in Peter?
Yes.
All right, Peter, go ahead.
Well, let's see if I can get this gizmo to.
You got it. We can hear you.
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to turn my camera on too, because I don't like to be the ghost of the image in the background. So you mentioned the fact that you're an old man, and so am I, 87. But I have been following developments in the Middle East ever since reading A Boy's Life of Colonel Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia to the rest of us, as a boy. And so I'm really grateful for your astonishing candor, and I think I will not go on too much longer, but I attended a lecture over at UNH a couple of months ago by somebody you probably know, Miko. Peled.
Yeah, I know Miko very well. Yeah.
Do you? I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
You're familiar with this book, The General's Son?
Indeed. In fact, the same person who published some of my books published that.
I wonder whether you would comment perhaps a little bit about his proposal for a resolution of the current mess that we're in that whole area of Palestine.
Well, I don't know that I'm qualified to do that. I mean, he has a remarkable story, which is recounted in that book, The General's Son. He actually lost someone in his family to terrorism. And he asked himself why the terrorists would have done that. And he went and talked to people, and he began to realize that, in fact, Israel was terrorizing everybody else. And he didn't want to have part of that. His father was actually the governor of Gaza for a while. But I don't know what his current proposal for solving the issue is. My own strong instinct, I guess, because you got me a bit on the age, but I'm getting there. I'm catching up with you.
I don't want you to catch up to me. I'd have to die for that to happen.
Well, don't do that. Anyway, my strong conviction, I guess, because of how old I am and I grew up in America, is one state, democratic. And but apparently this is unacceptable to any Zionist, and very few Israelis. By the way, a lot of people are emigrating from Israel. The economy's in deep trouble. There have been probably 80,000 bankruptcies of small businesses. Israel had great pride, justifiably, in being a country that had had a lot of startups, and those startups are now abroad, maybe in New Jersey. I don't know whether there are any in New Hampshire, but they're not happening in Israel. Partly because everybody's stuck in the army doing duty that they would rather not do, and of course the suicide rate is up now terribly among veterans from the Israeli reserves, who 1 out of 7 suicide attempts succeed. People just can't stomach what they had to do and what they saw. And I think if the war ever ends, which it hasn't, it's probably not rightly called a war, it's an extermination. But if this conflict ever ends, I would expect PTSD to take a very high toll on Israelis as well as on Palestinians, although Palestinians seem to be better able to cope with adversity. So I don't know what Miko's latest proposal is, and I won't try to fabricate it.
Well, I look forward to. Was it correctly stated that you're a resident over at River Woods?
I am indeed. I came to New Hampshire to live free and die. And it's not exactly free at Riverwoods, but I'm working on the dying part.
I'll look you up to continue this conversation and stand aside for somebody else to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Great. And Karina, I'm going to give you unmuting. Yeah, you got it.
Thank you. Hello, Chaz. It's a real pleasure to talk to you here. I listen to you on Judge Napolitano all the time. You're one of my top favorite guests on his show. I really appreciate everything you have to say. And also, I just wanted to let you know that I spent several years in Saudi Arabia. I was trying to see if we overlapped there, but I had already left for boarding school when you started. But my parents were still there when you came into the country.
In what part of Saudi Arabia?
We lived in Dhahran, Al Khobar, and Jubail and Riyadh.
Right.
So Jesse had sent out a talk you gave a couple of weeks ago, I guess, representing the Arab Center.
Yeah, the Arab Center, Washington, which is basically an extension of Qatari open foreign policy, which means that my Saudi friends probably didn't like me going there. But anyway.
Well, you ended the talk stating that you think this is going to be resolved sooner than later, and in good part for the efforts of the Arab Center. And I just wondered if you could comment further on that,
Sure.
The sooner or later part was very intriguing. And
sure. And I think, of course, I was talking to the Arab Center on the occasion of its 10th anniversary. So I had to mention the Arab Center, but there are lots of people, including this group, working to raise consciousness and educate people about realities of the region. Although we have, as I think I said in that talk, an appallingly low level of understanding of the Arab world, of West Asia, and of the Israel-Palestine issue. And I'll give you an anecdote in a minute that illustrates part of this. That's changing very rapidly. You can see now politicians who duck the issue are having to come to grips with it. And those who don't come to grips with it, I think, are going to be punished at the polls because, there are one or two of us geezers who care about it, but there are a lot of young people who do. And they don't want to be associated with genocide or with cruelty. I mean, my God, a television debate in Israel about whether it's permissible to sodomize prisoners. I mean, how off the charts can you get to have that kind of thing? And the person who released the video, or had something to do with releasing the video of the rape of the Palestinian male prisoner by Israeli soldiers, has just been arrested for doing that. Not for overseeing the prisons, which she did, but for her revealing what was going on in them. Anyway, so here's the anecdote. And this is why social media is important. I was in, I think it was Abu Dhabi, might have been Dubai, and somewhere in the United Arab Emirates 20 some years ago. And I don't watch television, but I was in a hotel room and bored. So I turned on the evening news in Arabic, which I understand. I don't speak it well. And there was a clip shown, home video taken in Gaza, which was then still occupied directly by the Israelis rather than encircled as a concentration camp. And it showed a young man being hauled out of a house by two plainclothes Israeli police or agents, kicked in the head and all over his body, and then shot in the head. And the two guys walked off laughing. And I thought to myself, when this hits the American press, all hell's going to break out. But of course, it never appeared because self-censorship and pro-Zionist censorship in the press is so firmly entrenched, which is why when I headed the Middle East Policy Council, I succeeded George McGovern in that role. When I headed that council, we were very pleased to be able to publish in the United States the Mearsheimer-Walt book on the Israel lobby, for which I later paid when I was appointed to be head of the National Intelligence Council. Every Zionist dog in the world came out and bit my ankles and tried to, and one of the charges was that I had done that. But anyway, no good deed goes unpunished. So thank you for the question. I hope that's mildly responsive to what you wanted.
Yeah, I have another question, but I'll cede the floor and come back.
Okay.
Thanks, Karina. Paul, you are next.
Yes, thank you for being here, Mr. Freeman. Are any countries holding the U.S. feet to the fire over its policy in Israel? I mean, where is the outcry?
Well, it's not coming from the Arab countries. They have a proverb which says, kiss the hand you cannot bite. And they are very much playing to the vanity of our president, whom they fear because he's so erratic and uncontrolled. So it's not coming from them. There are countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and so forth, Southeast Asia, majority Muslim nations, which are very vociferous on this subject. Obviously, Pakistan is too. And in fact, countries in the region are adjusting their policies quietly to distance themselves from us and find new sources of support. Unfortunately for them, the United States is the only country with the ability to project power directly into the Persian Gulf. But we're seeing the beginning of a coalition between the Gulf Arabs and Iran in order to counterbalance Israel, which is a threat to all of them. We've just seen Saudi Arabia sign a defense pact with Pakistan, which basically extends Pakistani nuclear protection to the Saudis against the Israelis. And so a lot of things are going on. And it doesn't, by the way, have anything much to do with our favorite enemies, China and Russia. These are reactions to our own actions and to Israel's actions in the region. So I would say, generally speaking, the global South, what our president once called shithole countries, are pretty adamant on this. But we've seen, for example, South Africa, which brought the case in the International Court of Justice, punished by us for that. Their ambassador sent out of Washington, punitive sanctions put on them. Cyril Ramaphosa, a very fine man I knew when I was working on South Africa. He was then the head of the trade unions, now the president, attempted to be humiliated like Zelensky in the Oval Office. And now we have a refugee program which is limited to white Afrikaners, 7,500 a year. I mean, you couldn't come up with a more absurd and distressing formula than that. So the answer is, yeah, people are pushing, but we're kicking them in the shins back. And so it's not a pretty picture.
We'll go to Jennifer, and then Jesse, maybe you want to ask some from the chat.
I can't hear you, Jennifer. You're muted.
Jennifer, it should let you. I've given you permission. Try again.
You may have to do that yourself in the lower right corner.
Yeah. If you can put it in the chat, we'll find it there. Meanwhile, I know Karina had one more question, and then we can go to the
finally.
There you go.
Okay.
Good, but I was hitting that thing as hard as I could. I'm sorry. I wanted to talk about domestic political stuff. A while ago, I became aware that there was an attempt to make any criticism of Israel to be equivalent to anti-Semitism.
Right.
And I'm wondering where you think that's headed and whether it's just not going to happen, or whether it's a serious problem.
It's a very serious problem. AIPAC and other members, other groups in the rather complex Israel Zionist lobby have actually succeeded in getting state legislation in almost half the states that criminalizes criticism of Israel and prevents anyone who has uttered an unkind word about Israel from getting a government contract. There's been a huge push by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel, which is the propaganda generator, to impose a standard on the world which says that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. But of course, the most ferocious critics of Israel are Jewish.
Right.
And more power to them. I mean, I admire the courage they show in standing up to a community that traditionally, until very recently, has been undivided on this issue, and which considers fealty to Israel part of the Jewish identity. And yet these people stand up and they criticize, and they are, in my view, true to what I consider one of the finest of Jewish traditions, which is the relentless pursuit of truth and the willingness to speak it to power. So I find this equation absolutely fallacious. There is no, to criticize, Israel's a foreign country. It's not a religion. It's not even, they weren't even a people. Jews were not considered a people. They were considered a religious community until Zionists created a Jewish people. And we have the odd phenomenon. I have ultra-Orthodox Jewish friends who point out to me that Prime Minister Netanyahu claims to be the Pope of Judaism. He speaks for all Jews, he says. Nonsense. He is the head of a government in a country 7,000 miles away from us. and why he should be allowed to speak for some guy who's a practicing Jew living in Brooklyn, New York, is absolutely beyond that person and beyond me. So this is a dangerous fallacy, and it does need to be combated. And we do need to be careful because anti-Semitism is a real thing. We don't, and it's very easy to slide from anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism because so many Jews have traditionally supported Israel, whatever it did. But Jews are getting away from that position, and they need help to do so.
Let's take John's hand up, and then Jesse's going to take some from the chat.
Well, it's certainly an honor to be able to talk to you face to face, even if we're separated by 12,000 miles. I live in Japan.
Oh, good.
I totally am awed by your perspicuous, brilliant commentary through this whole discussion so far. But I'd like to kind of change the context of the discussion to put a question to you. I've watched for 30 years with with increasing alarm at how the United States' dealings, both with its own citizens and with the world, has become more lawless. We break treaties, we break agreements. Our word is no longer dependable or trustworthy. And so, and justifiably, everybody here, I'm sure, is extremely outraged by all of this, and thus we protest and we have petitions and we call our congressmen, we call the White House, but the trajectory still continues toward a degradation of the quality of our government. So here's the question I put to you. I have contended for a long time that as long as the people that are now in power are in power, none of this will change, regardless of our noble and well-intentioned efforts as citizens, because we have essentially become voiceless. I also maintain that in order to change this trajectory and reverse the horrible direction that the country has taken in the last 3 decades, that we need to replace the people in government, starting with Congress. To me, there is it's almost a distraction. There is an emphasis put on presidential elections. While our imperial presidency certainly poses a very serious threat, a fatal threat to our functioning as a democracy, the real power in this country resides with the Congress. Congress can impeach the president can impeach Congress. If we want to stop the president from doing the things he's doing, is all we have to do is get a veto-proof vote in Congress. So here's my question to you. I maintain that as long as the people in Congress are owned by AIPAC and owned by the MIC and owned by Wall Street and so forth, they are completely deaf to everything we say. And until we institute real choice at the polls, that is, be able to go to the polls and say, I'm going to vote for this guy because he is a bona fide peace candidate, or I'm going to vote for this candidate because he's not taking money from AIPAC and he will listen to his people. To me, that is the only vector that as activists we can pursue to change the condition of our government. Do you agree with that or not?
I heartily agree, and thank you for that very articulate statement. We were born as a constitutional democracy, a republic of law, in which the law, not a single human being or even a few human beings, determined the course of our evolution, and we've lost that. We have seen the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment against searches and seizures, basically set aside. We have seen absolutely outrageous, lawless behavior by the executive branch. Murdering people on the high seas off Venezuela, and thereby validating the campaign boast of 2016 that Donald Trump could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't affect his cult following. This is the death of our republic. It is the death of our republic, which is why I mentioned that, and here I will introduce a weird theory that since you're in Japan, you probably know, but that is the Chinese theory of dynastic cycles. Chinese have had multiple dynasties, each one of them a constitutional order in our terms. And they've concluded that constitutional orders last 225 to 250 years, at which point they collapse in one of three ways. There's a rebellion, and I think we're in a pre-revolutionary situation, precisely because of the issue you point to, which is that our political elite doesn't give a damn about ordinary people. They are responsive to money, which the Supreme Court has declared is speech. And turns out they're right about that. So you either have a rebellion or you have a foreign invasion, which overthrows the dynasty. And of course, China for 600 of the last 1,000 years was ruled by foreigners, not Chinese. Or finally, on rare occasions, the country pulls itself together. And while it loses, it can't recreate the golden age. It has a silver age. And that has happened in a couple of occasions. But we're at the 250-year mark. Or if you want to count it from the Constitution, maybe not quite that. And one has to wonder. I don't actually put much credence in theories like this, but one has to wonder whether there isn't something to it. So I am very disturbed by the prospect that we could have serious civil strife and unrest because of the unresponsiveness of government. We're in a government shutdown. SNAP, food stamps have been suspended. The air traffic control system is not working, and so forth and so on and so on. And we're going to bring in a bunch of 7,500 Afrikaners as the only refugees we bring in next year. And this done without consultation with Congress, which the law requires. You know, we're in a lawless state. And our indifference, our inaction, our impotence in the face of the Israeli atrocities in and around Israel proper is just evidence of that. So yes, I agree with you. And I will be, by the way, I see Karina's back with her hand up. I will be on Judge Napolitano tomorrow at 8, I guess. I don't know what he wants to talk about, but I never know in advance.
That time flies by. Amy, it is 7:55. I think we're coming to an end here. Is there time for one more, or?
Yeah, if you want to pull something from the chat, we'll do one more.
We haven't. I'd like to change the subject. There's Amy's question here because we have not spoken about it. Chaz, for what you'd like to say about this, but what is going on? Where is Ukraine and Russian war heading? Where are we going?
Nowhere. It's headed toward a Russian victory on the battlefield in the dictation of terms. People are in denial. There are three issues that provoke the Russians. They made this very clear from 1994 on. Boris Yeltsin, before Vladimir Putin, made it clear that if NATO proposed to expand and to put American weaponry and other European weaponry aimed at Russia in Ukraine, and that this would provoke a Russian reaction. So there was no surprise, or there should have been none. I won't go over the whole history, but the Russians from the beginning have said there are three issues. One is Ukrainian neutrality. Ukraine was recognized as an independent country by Russia as the successor to the Soviet Union on the basis of its pledge that it would remain neutral and not become a force against Russia. The Russians have reacted in the same way that the United States reacted to the Soviet placement of missiles in Cuba, or in an earlier era, the French imposition of Maximilian of Austria as Emperor of Mexico and the garrisoning of Mexico. First thing we did after the Civil War was mass 40,000 troops on the Mexican border and saying to the French, get out or we're coming after you. And they had the good sense to leave. So the first issue is Ukraine cannot be a threat to Russia, and it cannot be a threat to Western Europe either. It should be neutral. It should be a bridge and a buffer between the two parts of Europe. The second issue was solved apparently at the Minsk Accords, sponsored by Germany and France, which purported to arrange a federal system in Ukraine in which the Donbass region, which is overwhelmingly Russian-speaking, would have the sort of rights that Quebecois have to operate their own autonomous cultural and linguistic policies within a federal context. Germany and France later admitted that the only reason they sponsored that was to gain time to arm Ukraine against Russia. And in fact, on the eve of the Russian invasion in February 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces, which numbered 780,000 by then, NATO trained, NATO equipped, the largest army in Europe other than the Turks and the Russians, who were about the same size. They were poised on the borders of Donbass, about to retake it from the rebels who had revolted when their rights to use Russian to teach their children and communicate with local government had been removed. And the final issue is some sort of discussion of a new security architecture for Europe, which doesn't threaten Russia and doesn't allow Russia to threaten others. And these issues have been on the table since 1994, and they were very forcefully put forward by Putin at the Munich Security Conference in 2007. And what we did when the Russians issued an ultimatum finally in December 2021, Tony Blinken, our then Secretary of State, said, we're not going to talk about any of these issues. Shut up. And so the Russians made good on their threat. And until we solve these issues, there is not going to be a peace. And unfortunately for Ukraine, Ukraine is very likely to lose a lot more territory and a lot more people. And it doesn't have many people to lose. It had 54 million people at the time of its independence. It probably has a population of 20 million now. And it's probably going to lose its Black Sea coast and access to the sea if this goes on. It shouldn't go on. We should get serious about this. But we have no peace proposal. We have a ceasefire proposal. And that won't do it. I think that took us 1 minute past the hour.
No, thank you for that. Amy, I turn it over to you. I'd like to say thank you to Chaz. Chaz, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for yours and everybody. I hope it hasn't been a total waste of your time.
Not at all. Yeah, I have a few things here that I need to tell folks. So yeah, stay in touch with the New Hampshire Peace Action at nhpeaceaction.org and on Facebook to learn more about what we're working on and what programming we have coming up. I have a few highlights. Our Ceasefire Now vigils continue Wednesday, November 5, 2 to 3. We'll be outside Representative Pappas's office in Dover. Thursday, November 6, noon to 1, people will be in City Plaza, Concord. And Wednesday, November 12th, 2 to 3, will be outside Senator Shaheen's office in Dover. On Thursday, November 13th at 7 p.m. via Zoom, New Hampshire Peace Action ACTS, ACTS, plans to focus on Venezuela. Our next Peace and Justice conversation via Zoom is on Monday, November 17, 7 p.m. Resistance, Peace, and Poetry with Katie Zale. And special program I want to let you know about on Wednesday, November 19th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. We join with Not in My Name, New Hampshire to present Life Under Occupation in the West Bank. We'll be Zooming with Isa Amro, a human rights activist and nonviolence practitioner living in Hebron. And we're really thrilled. He'll Zoom in with us from there, even though it'll be the middle of the night for him. And lastly, just to let you know that this series is free and open to everyone. That said, your support is incredibly helpful in keeping us going. So nhpeaceaction.org/donate. We would welcome you to donate. And I want to thank both Chaz Freeman and Jesse Gillis for putting tonight together and delving into some great subjects. Obviously, we could have talked a lot longer, and maybe someday we'll have you back and do that. But
I'd be happy to rejoin you.
All right.
I'd like to thank you and Jesse and also Doreen and her cat.
Great. And we're glad to have you, well, some of us as our neighbor here in New Hampshire. So please, everyone, join me in visible thank you.
Okay.
And thanks, everyone, for